Red and blue lights strobed across my unfinished lawn as 3 squad cars blocked my driveway before I'd even unpacked one box. Deborah stood behind the officers, arms crossed, smiling like she'd already won a war I didn't know had started. "I'm Elena Reyes, 38, wife, mother of 2, and I just bought the strangest, most beautiful house in Millbrook Ridge, built into the hillside itself. Our earth-sheltered home was energy-efficient, storm-proof, and quiet. A dream my husband Marcus and I had saved 12 years to build." Deborah Whitfield ran the HOA like her personal kingdom, patrolling streets in her golf cart, measuring grass blades with an actual ruler. Neighbors whispered she'd forced 3 families out over paint colors, mailbox heights, and a garden gnome she called visually offensive. My underground home didn't fit her tidy vision of white picket sameness, and I could feel her judging it before we'd even moved a couch. "This isn't approved architecture," Deborah announced, clipboard in hand, the day our moving truck arrived at dawn. "It's called a bermed home, Deborah." "Fully permitted," I said, still hauling boxes, trying to stay pleasant despite her tone. She snapped photos of our exposed skylights, muttering about bunkers and code violations loud enough for passing joggers to hear. By afternoon, a laminated warning notice appeared taped to our door, citing sections that didn't even exist in our HOA handbook. That's when the sirens came. Deborah had called 911, claiming she smelled gas and saw suspicious underground activity at my address. Officers searched our property for 20 humiliating minutes while neighbors gathered, phones out, recording my family's worst afternoon. "False alarm," the officer finally said, clearly annoyed, glancing at Deborah with the tired look of someone who'd been here before. Deborah didn't apologize. She simply said, "Better safe than sorry," and walked away smiling like she'd made her point. That night, Marcus asked if we'd made a mistake buying here, and for the first time, I genuinely wondered too. The next morning, a fine arrived, $2,000 for unauthorized structural modifications visible from the street. I called the county planning office, and they confirmed our permits were pristine, filed years before we ever met Deborah. When I brought the proof to the HOA office, the clerk looked nervous and said Deborah handles violations personally now. Deborah refused to meet me, sending a curt email instead. "The board has spoken. Compliance is not optional. Ms. Reyes." My neighbor Priya pulled me aside and whispered that Deborah's last compliance target lost their home to a forced lien. I laughed nervously, but the look on Priya's face told me she wasn't exaggerating even slightly. Another fine appeared 3 days later, this one for unregistered vehicle, meaning my daughter's bicycle left on the porch. Deborah began driving past our house twice daily, slowing down, staring, like she was building a case against us. My son Diego, 10 years old, asked why the mailbox lady hated our home so much for no reason. I didn't have an answer for him, and that silence hurt more than any fine Deborah could send. Marcus suggested selling, but something in me refused. We'd built this house with our own hands and savings. I started documenting everything: emails, fees, photos, timestamps, a folder growing thicker by the week. Deborah, meanwhile, hosted a neighborhood safety meeting, where she called our home a threat to property values and children. Several neighbors nodded along, swayed by her confident tone and years of unquestioned authority in this cul-de-sac. One older resident, Mr. Chin, later told me privately that Deborah had handled his renovation dispute the exact same way. A pattern was forming, and I began to realize this wasn't really about my house at all. Deborah's son, turned out, worked at the law firm, suddenly reviewing my permits for irregularities that didn't exist. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA management company, attaching every document proving our full legal compliance. For 2 weeks, nothing happened, no fines, no visits. An eerie quiet that somehow felt more unsettling than the chaos. Marcus said maybe she'd backed off, finally realizing she couldn't bully a family with actual paperwork on their side. I wanted to believe it too, letting myself breathe for the first time since the sirens that first day. We even hosted a small housewarming, neighbors cautiously curious, admiring how cool and quiet our underground rooms actually felt. Priya admitted she'd misjudged the house, calling it genuinely stunning once she finally saw the inside herself. Then Deborah returned, this time with a lawyer, claiming our home violated a historic district overlay nobody had ever mentioned. She'd fabricated a document backdating a zoning restriction, insisting it predated our permits by several convenient months. I demanded to see the original filing. Deborah stalled, claiming it was under review at county archives. My attorney, a sharp woman named Farah, discovered the document's font didn't even exist during the claimed filing year. Deborah had forged evidence, and Farah said this alone could constitute serious fraud against a homeowner. Instead of backing down, Deborah escalated, placing a lien on our property for unpaid violation fees, totaling absurd amounts. She mailed notices to every neighbor, painting us as problem residents refusing to follow community rules. Diego came home crying because another child repeated Deborah's words, calling our house the criminal bunker. That night, Marcus finally lost his composure, shouting that Deborah was destroying our children's sense of safety here. I held him and promised I wouldn't let this woman win, though privately, I wasn't entirely sure how to stop her. Deborah began appearing at our gate uninvited, photographing our children playing, calling it documentation for the board. I confronted her directly. Why us? What did we actually do to deserve this? She smiled coldly and said, some homes just don't belong here. Elena, surely you understand that. Her words carried a weight I hadn't expected. This wasn't about zoning anymore. It felt personal, almost territorial. Farah dug deeper and found Deborah had quietly listed a development interest in our exact street address online. Suddenly, the forged documents, the fines, the lien, it all made a chilling kind of financial sense. Deborah wanted our lot, our underground foundation, for a boutique development project she'd been secretly planning for years. She needed us gone, our home devalued or seized, before investors would commit to her expansion plans. I sat with that truth for a long moment, feeling anger replace the fear that had gripped me for weeks. Farah suggested we request a formal HOA hearing, gathering every neighbor, every document, every forged signature into one room. Priya agreed to speak, admitting Deborah had pressured her too, though she'd been too afraid to say so publicly. Mr. Chun offered his own records, proving Deborah's violations against him had used the same fabricated font. I compiled everything into a single binder, 3 inches thick, labeled simply, The Truth About Deborah Whitfield. The night before the hearing, Deborah left a voicemail warning me to drop this quietly, for my family's sake. That threat, recorded and timestamped, became the final piece Farah needed to escalate things beyond the HOA entirely. The hearing room was packed, neighbors murmuring as Deborah strode in, still radiating unearned confidence. She opened by calling me an unstable homeowner spreading baseless conspiracy theories against dedicated volunteers. Farah calmly placed the forged zoning document on the projector, font analysis glowing beside Deborah's signature. Gasps rippled through the room as Priya and Mr. Chun stood, confirming identical forgeries used against them. Deborah's smile finally cracked, her eyes darting toward the exit like a cornered animal. Then I stood and revealed what I'd kept quiet for 11 years. I lead a federal task force investigating HOA fraud. The room went silent as I explained my unit had been tracking suspicious liens across 3 counties for months. Deborah's forged documents, her threatening voicemail, her land scheme, it all matched a pattern my team already suspected. 2 agents I'd quietly looped in stepped forward from the back row, badges out, faces grim and certain. "Deborah Whitfield, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and extortion under color of authority," one agent said. Neighbors erupted, some cheering, others simply staring in stunned disbelief at the woman who'd terrorized their street. Deborah was led out in handcuffs, her golf cart abandoned crookedly in the parking lot outside. The HOA board dissolved within weeks, replaced by an elected committee that actually read the bylaws honestly. 6 months later, our underground home stood proudly finished, garden blooming, Diego's laughter echoing through the quiet hillside rooms.